So, your loved one needs some help or has fallen ill, and you need someone to look after them, but you have no idea where to begin to find the right care. Let's Talk Home Care with Aishling is here to help. Join us weekly on our journey to educate families on home care for their loved ones. Now, here's your host, Aishling.
Well, good morning and welcome to our podcast today, where we talk all about home care, some of the issues that family members have, in addition to what we're trying to do in educating the consumer on home care, because so many people do not understand all the different layers, the challenges, and even when you hire somebody, it's not a set it and forget it and you walk away. So today I'm delighted to have on the show Emily, and I met Emily quite recently and we started to have a conversation, and I was blown away by all the different things that Emily told me that she's trying to balance. So Emily, I'd like you to share with our listeners today just exactly what you shared with me last week in the challenges that you're having trying to take care of your mother's needs. But before you begin to do that, can you tell us how many other family members you have and why you are the one that's taking this piece on and how long you've been trying to balance it?
Sure. I began about 8 years ago with my mother and father both moving into, actually, it was even longer than that ago, about 12 years ago, they moved into an assisted living home on the independent side. I have a brother who's older than I am, but I'm more the caregiver, more the caring person. Not that he isn't, but it just kind of fell to me being the girl, I guess. And he's had some ups and downs, so it just kind of was the right situation. I run my own business, so it was kind of something that my parents felt that I could handle. And so as my father saw that my mother had the need, we started checking to see what was going on. And the doctor within the facility had suggested that, yes, she had early stages of dementia. So what we did was we moved her into the assisted side. My father remained on the independent side, and he would go visit every day. He would, he was in his little scooter and he'd go over and sit with her all day long, go to meals with her, and then go home, and then they'd do it all over again the next day. Mom went through some periods where she was quite angry, didn't want really to have him around, but it was somewhat heartbreaking for him. He would try his best and would spend at least a few hours with her every day, and she would muddle through that, but constantly griping about things. And it was just so odd for us because Mom was always the sweet, calm, collected, never showed really a whole lot of negative emotion, much less a whole lot of, emotion, we'll say. Just always a very beautiful, caring lady. And then when she started having where she would get anxious and have the need to always be doing something, even get up and think she had a million things she had to get done, which was her daily routine for however many years, all through my childhood up until she had this issue. She was always on the go. And I think she still wanted to, but couldn't put things together. Things were getting overwhelming for her. So I do think that the smaller apartment helped her. But we found that we needed somebody to watch her because she'd hide things. She'd find things and put them in a drawer somewhere and we wouldn't be able to find them. We always thought somebody might have taken them, or we knew the reality of it was that they were probably tucked somewhere. So we got somebody to come in and stay with her. We were fortunate we were in a home, so there was contacts, there were people, other caregivers around who gave reference and so forth. And we thought it was just for a few hours each day. And that lasted for quite some time until we had to extend the hours. So then I had to get a second caregiver. So the first caregiver was good for a few days a week, every, few hours. Dad was able to manage the other aspect of it. And then it got to where we needed a second caregiver. So we hired on a second caregiver. They took over half and half and stayed most of the week. And then we were told that we either had to move Mom down to the Alzheimer's floor or get around the clock care because Mom had started to become a potential flight risk because she would get up at night potentially and walk down the halls. And they weren't equipped on the assisted level to deal with that. So, the home was a wonderful thing. Mom and Dad planned that all on their own. They really wanted to take care of things so that Butch and myself would not have to. But we ended up having to deal with it, deal with things beyond what the home could handle, in essence. And the home was really a full service agency. There's issues that come up that they just can't do that one-on-one personal attention that maybe the family members want for their family. So that's
okay. So I have 1,000,001 questions to ask you just in the little introduction that you gave us. So what I'm understanding is that your mom and dad put this care in place for themselves. And I'm assuming that when that happened, that they were both cognitively fine, right?
100%. Yes.
Okay, so they must have planned that somewhere in their 50s or their early 60s or whatever. So they moved into this community. I don't need to know the name. And everything was hunky-dory, so to speak, until your mom started to display some cognitive issues. Okay, so you mentioned that your dad was in a wheelchair, or his little scooter, so he used to go over to her. So did he have some issues as well? Medical issues that needed taking care of?
His were more on the physical side of things, and Mom had more of the mental side of issues. So his were more hip issues, and he never wanted to get surgery. So he used the scooter to get around, and that was common in this facility. He could walk, but short distances. He was a bigger man, so it was hard for him to, carry the weight long distances. So, Mom was always a more petite person and much easier, thank goodness, for the caregivers to be able to handle.
Right. So I'm just thinking, I never had parents that were in a community. So can you just give our listeners a broad idea of what were the costs identified when your mom and dad moved in together to the independent part of this community? Just like a ballpark figure. It doesn't have to be dollar and cents exact.
Well, my folks were in the South. So I live up north. It was a great distance, 800 miles difference. So that's why they planned to do this, because they knew that I was not local and it would make it much easier and we would feel much more comfortable about them. There were multiple choices of packages. The home was just being built and being opened. So they had the choice of, they gave an amount down and in essence purchased their home, their apartment, not to get that money back, but to stay at the same level of pay for their entire life living. Okay. So their cost stayed the same, with the exception of increases for cost of living. And then when Dad passed away, it reduced some, not in half, but some. And so it's been considerable. It's upwards of $5,000 a month plus.
Okay. So we'll say when your mom and dad were there together that roughly you were paying about $5,000 a month. And that was for the independent, correct?
And I'll correct you. When Dad was there, it was about $8,000 a month. And then when he passed, it went down to about $5,000 for Mom.
Okay. What I also want the listeners to know, because obviously, in this area, Orland Park, Illinois, Chicago area, it's similar what we're talking about, which is why we're trying to educate our audience. So, regardless of the fact that your dad passed away, when they were there independently, when your mom moved into the assisted living side, the money had to go up because there's more costs associated, correct, with the assistance that your mom was getting on the assisted side.
There typically would, had my folks not put down the large sum of money that they did.
So, in regards to your dad having the physical, I won't say disability, but the inability to be able to walk around, and the fact that they had paid up front quite a substantial amount of money. What I'm hearing you say is that when they were both living in independent, it was one fee. And then when your mom went over to the assisted side with your dad still in the independent side, there was a little bit more money that was being taken off your retainer, so to speak. Would that be correct?
That typically would have been the case, but because they had paid this lump sum up front of kind of the cost of buying a very nice home, it was countered by the fact that their price would remain no matter where they were in the facility.
Gotcha.
So they were able to grow into the facility based on having put this money down. But had they chosen a different option and not put that large amount down, they could have paid as they went, and then as they needed additional help, that would have increased their price, yes.
Okay. So it sounds like they paid the larger amount, which meant that they could go to independent, to assisted, to memory care, and there was no more money that needed to be given, right? However, right. You said that your dad has since passed and that your mom is in the independent piece. Now, if I remember correctly, when you and I spoke the other day, you said that your mom has some form of dementia, but she's not in the memory care side. So my question is, why is she still in independent, and why did you not put her in the memory care side if the full services would be taken care of over there? And then we'll bounce back as to what you're challenged with now with the caregivers in the assisted living side.
Okay. So she stayed in the assisted side when we moved her there because we were concerned about putting her in the dementia or Alzheimer's level, if you will, because cognitively, we felt she had more ability to remain more stimulated with the caregivers than to be put on the floor and have the intermittent interchanges with folks than having the full day worth of interaction with the caregivers. And we that was just a decision that we felt. Growing up, I played tennis. I thought, you play somebody who's better than you, you get better. So we keep her in an area where people are better, that they would help stimulate her, and it would be a better situation. So that's why she stayed there.
Okay, so that makes sense. So you didn't want to transition her into the memory care because you felt she wasn't really quite bad enough to be over there, because in essence, even though the care is really good on the memory care side, the stimulation is less, maybe be around people who are that little bit more advanced that might necessarily pull her down. So you decided to keep her in the middle section. Okay. So now let's talk about that, because what your mom and dad paid for up front isn't covering what's happening now. So I want you to tell me a little bit about that. So what additional expenses are you incurring now with your mom in that middle section?
So all along, all the caregiving is above and beyond, whether it's part-time, full-time, whatever we choose to have for her as far as caregivers beyond what the facility provides is all above and beyond. We pay for, and I don't know if this is true in all homes, but if she needs pull-ups, if she needs chucks, which are the bed liners and so forth, all of her bathing and so forth items. It's kind of to the level of how you wish to, at least in this facility, to how you wish to care for your parent. They offer some of these items, but they're pretty down and dirty items. So we've chosen essentially to purchase, beyond that at times. And as far as had they not done the investment up front, we would be paying more to be in this assisted side because there's more care being given by the facility. And then to add another level, we have recently, in the past year, moved her down to the skilled floor, which typically is when somebody is not able to get around for a period of time. So it could be a short period of time, have broke hip or what have you, have to come back and go through the rehab and so forth. Mom, a year ago, we gave her the flu shot, and unfortunately, she got quite sick, not necessarily from the flu shot, just was sick coincidentally during the same time period and never really recovered her strength. So we put her on the skilled floor thinking that with our caregivers, the assistance of the floor folks that are used to having to lift and move and so forth would be able to help our caregivers, and it would be a better system. Mom's in a smaller apartment. She actually cognitively has done even much better than when she was upstairs in a larger apartment. And so, it goes on. I mean, at some point, do we move her to the dementia floor? Don't we? Obviously, money doesn't last forever. So,
right. So can you share, Carol, again, I don't need, dollar and cents, but on top of what your parents paid out, what are the additional costs on a weekly basis that you're giving out for caregivers to come in to help your mom within the community? Roughly, how much are you talking about?
On a weekly basis, it can run from $1,200 to $1,500 a week.
So you're paying an additional, the guts of $5,000 more per month.
Yes.
Right. Yes. Okay. So where is that money coming from, Carol? Because as you said, that there isn't an endless pot of gold. Is like, how are you affording this type of care? Because the general average person would not be able to afford this.
No. And I know my husband and I aren't in a situation where we will be able to afford it. As my father did very well. They planned, they had savings, they had investments and so forth, but we have slowly dwindled all of that. And every day it's another concern as to, will it last? When the stock market goes up and down, it's a concern. When, we elect a new president, there's changes in the in the stock market and so forth. So all of that are issues that we deal with and have to be concerned with.
Right. Now, in that extra, $4,000 to $5,000 a month that you're spending, is that just for the caregivers? And then on top of that, you still have the depends and the chucks and all the supplies. Is that in addition to?
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
Wow. All right. So for those that are listening, for the sandwich generation, such as yourself, you're part of the sandwich generation. That's somewhere between the age of 40s and 60s and trying to maintain their own life, their own family, and taking care of parents and balancing. What advice would you give to the generation that's coming up behind us about saving and planning and preparing?
I almost would say that COVID may have been a blessing in many ways, if you want to look at it from the bright side. We've all learned that we don't need a lot of what we thought we may have needed, that we do need to save for times like this. We do need to, be conscious of what's ahead of us and that things can happen out of the blue. I'm not saying to, stop living and be concerned about everything. I'm just saying that it's just opened our eyes, I think, for me personally, that, planning is very important. My husband and I have planned, certainly not for the extent of time that we thought my mother would be ill with this dementia. 8 years is a long time. I had an uncle who became ill, and within 6 months, he had passed on. So there's all forms, all types, and you don't know what you'll be dished, but whatever it is, you've got to be prepared for it. And this was far greater than I would think
you'd ever anticipated.
Oh, absolutely.
And to the folks that are listening that don't know a lot about dementia, from the time of diagnosis through the end can be anywhere from 8 to 20 years. So that's a long time for those monies to last if they're not saved and invested in. But Carol, just to wrap up what we're talking about today, I'm sorry, Emily, just to wrap up what we're talking about today, we're talking about the care that your mom is receiving. We're talking about the additional care that you have, the additional expenses. But I wanted to kind of blow the cap off on this one because we know that based on conversations that you and I have had together, that you're not using an agency, which of course would cost you even more money. I'm not worried about the fact that, that you have your own caregivers and that you're doing what you're doing. But what we're not addressing here is the fact that you have a full-time business yourself. So if you're not using an agency, because obviously you can't afford to, you're using private caregivers, which is absolutely fine. Who then is managing all of that piece? Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, that is on myself as well. I have my nice little trustee schedule each month, and I pencil in who's working when. And often I have caregivers tell me 2 hours before they're supposed to be there that they won't be able to make it. My mother is now at a stage where not having somebody at mealtime is not really an option. So I either have to call the home and make sure that the home has somebody available to her to help feed her, which they have already set their people that they know they have to feed. So it just adds, I'll say a burden, but another person to their list. So she may or may not then eat timely because of it. And it throws a wrench in my day. I may have to get on the phone and call and see if I can get another caregiver to come in. But for the most part, the best way I've done it is to have a caregiver that's been with us for quite some time. She helps me schedule. She, gets paid a little bit more than the others because she helps manage things, but she is not a manager. She certainly doesn't want to take on the responsibility of that role. She has children herself, so she has days she comes, has to call in.
Sure. So you must be, Emily, under an incredible amount of stress. How do you balance that yourself?
I guess my belief in the Lord. I don't know. It's I'm a believer in my faith, and I just know that I have to do certain things. I'm a planner, so I try to plan up front. A good plan doesn't always stick, but at least it's a plan to start with, and we go from there. So it's, and I've had caregivers come and go. I've had issues you can't even imagine that have come up.
I can.
In business, so I'm sure you can. I'm sure you can.
Being a small business owner myself, and I know that you're a small business owner, I just have to say that I think you're an angel to be able to balance what you're trying to balance. I'm in awe, and I'm so delighted that you came on the program today, because this is what this program is all about. It is to make folks aware that it's not a one and done by putting your parents in a community. I even hate the word facility, so I'm not even going to use that word, but in a beautiful community, which certainly sounds like your parents planned and saved for all their life. But that was only the beginning of the issues when it really should have been the end of the issues, right? And it
Exactly.
sounds like it wasn't. And now that your dad's passed on, you have all of these pieces to deal with. And I just want to say, I think you're wonderful. I really think you're wonderful.
Well, thank you. Your parents are dear to you, so you almost would do anything. So,
right. With the community that you have your mom in, you did mention that you have somebody who's there that assists her with feeding and meals, which is a very important part of everybody's day. So I'm just trying to wrap my head around the extra challenges that you have, that if your caregiver calls off with no notice and you've done your due diligence to try and fill in with the other ladies or gents that you have, and then some in the hopper behind that, and you still can't fill that shift, it must be a great concern to you that how's your mother being taken care of when the folks who do that are not there for you?
Right. And I feel very sad because I feel like she may sit in her room by herself and without that, that person there to care and to talk and to interact with her. And I know the facility will take care of her. They're not going to,
of course,
leave her, in a bad state, but they certainly won't be able to be attentive timely because of the amount of people they have to deal with. So yes, those are the most concerning times. I'm, my stress level's probably the greatest when I know that that's the case. So
Sure. Well, this conversation has been so educational, even for me, and I'm in home care a long time, but fortunately for my family, we were able to keep our parents at home, which involved a whole crew of caregivers, which in actual fact were our family. As you know, we're one of 10. So there was 10 of us that rotated for 7 years round the clock, 24 hours a day. So slightly different situation. But for you to be managing what you're managing, there's so many different pieces. I just think that this topic is extremely educational. And I think us being able to have it and to share it with other people is really an educational point for the younger folks that are coming up the generation behind us, because I don't know that healthcare is going to change that dramatically. But I do know that the rise in dementia diagnosis is getting higher and higher. And I wonder, just listening to what you're dealing with, if stress has anything to do with it, because we have so much balance.
Very well could. I'm using my mental capacity now, so then it won't be there later. I don't know. There's another aspect of it that we didn't touch on, and that's, when is hospice appropriate and not even in a facility? Because mom's been on hospice, not because she was near end of life per se, but because she was losing weight, not doing well. So she got better. During that time, they were paying for a lot of the pull-ups and the chucks and the things that I have to pay for now out of pocket. So it ebbs and flows as far as the financial concerns, the healthcare concerns. When she's off hospice, because of what my mother's requested, we'd have to take her to the hospital, but no extreme measures. And so it's like,
sure,
so many things.
Well, now that's a subject that we're going to have to do a whole entire podcast on, because people don't understand what hospice care is. They think they understand, but they don't. And more so now, palliative care is the new front runner, which precedes hospice care. And that's a whole other podcast as well. So if it's all right with you, what I'd like to do is finish up on this topic today. And thank you so much for coming on the show. And perhaps we will talk a little bit, over the course of the next few months, and having you come back on the show and talk about that hospice piece and why she was put into hospice, and how a person comes onto hospice and how a person comes off hospice. Because I think ultimately the listeners today believe that hospice is a death sentence and it's the beginning of the end, but it's not always the case, right?
Not always. So.
Okay. So thank you so much for coming on the show. We really appreciate all of your great advice and insight. And this is going to be a tremendous, tremendous help to our listeners who need to put a plan for going forward with their parents in place. So thank you so much, Emily. We really do appreciate you coming on the show today.
Thank you, Aishling. Have a good day.
Thanks so much. You too. Bye-bye.